All right. I have no idea if this is working right now. Oh, it is recording. All right. Hello, AP students. I'm back with a quick review of the rhetorical analysis, and you've already taken notes on this, but I wanted to remind you about some of the notes. As a reminder, a rhetorical analysis is writing about writing. So one of the practice ones that you've done already is the Abigail Adams rhetorical analysis, and we're going to move into another practice one after this. So. Uh, 5 key features to writing a rhetorical analysis. Those include an arguable thesis, paying careful attention to the language of the text, paying careful attention to patterns and or themes of the text, making a clear interpretation of the text, and then, as always, writing in MLA format. Okay, I'm going to break down each of these key features individually, starting with an arguable thesis. So remember, a thesis statement is like a claim statement. So what you are doing when you create an arguable thesis, the word arguable means that somebody could disagree with you and still be credible. Okay, so in an analysis, it's like an interpretation of something, and people can have multiple interpretations. Your analysis, your goal is to argue for the validity of your analysis or your interpretation. One thing that happens to students a lot who fail to write effective analysis is they slide into summary. Remember, a summary of the text is not arguable. Everybody would have the same summary. You know, this person said this. Abigail Adams wrote this to her son. That's not arguable. Why she wrote it is arguable. Okay, so you can say Abigail Adams wrote to her son for this purpose, and here's the evidence, and then you use bits and pieces of summary there. So just a reminder that the primary function of the analysis is not to summarize the text, but you will use some summary to support the analysis. Okay, so reminder, summary of the text, not arguable. Use summary to support the analysis, not as the basis for your analysis. Okay, so that's the first key feature, an arguable thesis. Second is paying careful attention to the language of the text. And I am bugged right now that I think I have a capital E right here, and I'm going to fix it. Nope, I have caps lock on. That's why. Oh, so much better. All right, I'm leaving that in. I'm not cutting this. Okay, so pay careful attention to the language of the text. Look for specific word choice, imagery, metaphor, figurative language, other rhetorical devices. We've practiced these all year. The Who Has game, where you've tried to memorize the rhetorical devices. Now it's time to use that memory for its designed purpose. Identify the rhetorical devices and what their function is. Okay, combine the rhetorical devices with other contextual factors. So that's the second bullet point here. It's bring in context. So the culture, history, biographical facts, other similar texts, etc. That's like the stuff that surrounds the text. So the Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech is powerful not just because of the words that he says, but because of the time period and the culture surrounding the words that he says. So the fact that it's during the civil rights movement, that it's 100 years after the end of the Civil War, and when the slaves were freed and yet people are still fighting for equality, all of that matters as much as what he actually says, and it actually drives most of what he says. So understanding the historical factors and the cultural factors and impact of all of those things, that matters as well when you consider the language of the text. Okay, big thing when conducting an analysis is you read with the assumption that every word of text is meaningful. Okay, the author used that specific word in that specific place for a specific reason. Identify what the reason is, or theorize, hypothesize what that reason is, and then look for evidence that supports that hypothesis as well. Sorry. We've talked about this before, but when you conduct an analysis, you have to assume that everything is intentional. Okay, there's no accidents. I get students all the time when I conduct an and then, oh my gosh, I couldn't talk. When I conduct an analysis of something in front of the class, I have students that are like, did they do that on purpose or is that just an accident? It doesn't matter. We're operating under the assumption that everything is intentional. And most of the time, the professional writers and the great writers who we study did do things intentionally. And every once in a while, some things are an accident, but that doesn't mean that they're less valid. Okay, your job as the analyst is to pay attention to the language of the text and determine the impact of that language. And you do that by paying attention to specific word choice, contextual factors, and paying attention to who the author is and assuming that they did everything on purpose. Okay, so creating an arguable thesis is that first one. Paying careful attention to the language of the text is the second. The third is you're going to pay careful attention to the patterns or themes. So you're going to find evidence of meaningful patterns or themes within a text. When you do that, those patterns and themes reveal meaning, and you need to look beyond the surface. The best analysis reveals an understanding of layers within the text. So I'm thinking of the iceberg model when we talked about Hemingway, where his goal was to put the least amount on the surface, but the most amount below the surface. So he would cut, cut, cut. And it's like an iceberg where you only see 10% above the surface of the water, but you know that 90% is below the surface. So when we read Hills Like White Elephants, what we actually read was pretty limited, but what we understood was pretty vast. And so that's what you need to do when you're conducting an analysis is you understand the layers. You go below the surface. And this is the tough part. Well, it's not really tough, but this is not something that will happen easily. Okay. You have to work at this, and the work is going on in your head. By paying attention to these things and then making connections, that's where all the work is going. So instead of just reading something really quickly and understanding it at a surface level, you have to read something multiple times, or as you're reading it, ask yourself critical questions like the language of the text. Why did they use this word? Oh, there's a pattern. Hey, I recognize in Hills Like White Elephants that there's this issue with communication over and over and over again. The waitress speaks Spanish and only the man speaks Spanish. The girl doesn't, so the girl can't communicate. The man and the girl aren't really talking about what they actually want to talk about, so they're not really communicating. The man walks back through the bar and he sees all of these people seemingly enjoying their lives and he's jealous, but he can't communicate that to anybody. This pattern of the failure to communicate over and over, or the inability to communicate over and over, that is meaningful to your understanding of Hills Like White Elephants. So paying attention to careful patterns and themes and using your head as you read to think about critical questions is probably it's the most important part when you're conducting an analysis. Because if you're not doing that, you're going to do what I mentioned earlier, where you're going to understand something at a surface level, and then when you write about it, you're going to be summarizing it instead of analyzing it. And analyzing needs to be below the surface, understanding the layers within a text. Okay, so an arguable thesis, paying attention to the language, paying attention to patterns or themes, and now you're going to actually write what your analysis is with a clear interpretation. So you've created a thesis or made a claim. You're going to demonstrate the plausibility of your thesis through evidence found within the text. So you don't create a thesis out of thin air and just say, this is what I think, and great. You use pieces of evidence. It's like those Norman Rockwell paintings we've looked at throughout the year, the father and the son sitting on the train tracks. We don't actually know what's going on when we look at it, but when we start piecing all the little bits of evidence together, then we can make an assertion or an interpretation. Oh, the boy's got new clothes on. He's younger than the father. He's got books. He's got a suitcase. He's got a pennant. He's going to college. Oh, this has been really hard. His father had to work really hard to send him to college. He's got a blue collar outfit on. They're farmers. They've got tan lines. All of that. When you're creating your thesis, it should be based off of text evidence. So instead of looking at a picture, though, you're looking at a text and you say, okay, this is what Abigail Adams' purpose was. I know that because of this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence. Okay. Now, the fact that your thesis is arguable means that somebody could choose a different thesis and still be credible, because there might be other bits and pieces of text evidence. And if they interpret it in a different way, it would be logical, but that interpretation needs to be clear. So what your job is after you demonstrate the plausibility of your thesis through text evidence, you need to explain that to the reader in your analysis. You need to show the reader one way the text may be read or understood. This is your interpretation. And now the last thing is, do it in the third person. Speak confidently, or write confidently and write assertively and authoritatively. So instead of saying, I think that Abigail Adams meant to do this, take out I think. Abigail Adams meant to do this. This comment proves it. Oh, my phone's blown up. I'm going to silence it. All right. So do it in the third person, right? You don't need to say I think or I feel like. You don't really need to refer to yourself. You're just going to state it like it's a fact, because it's a clear interpretation that you're going to support with text evidence. Okay, finally, the fifth step is the MLA formatting. And since you're going to be typing everything, when we practiced before, we hand wrote everything. And, there's some things that transfer from MLA formatting to handwriting. But now that you're going to be typing and submitting to me, I am expecting everything to be in MLA format. So I'm going to skip down. I think you can see my mouse. I'm going to look at these 5 steps right here. Remember, when you're writing an essay, the first line in every paragraph is indented. Use the tab key to indent it, not the space bar. Everything is equally double spaced. So your header, your title, everything is double spaced in MLA format. Okay, everything is in size 12 Times New Roman font. Everything. Titles do not get a bigger font. Okay, nothing else. You don't reduce your font size for anything. Everything's in size 12. Okay, you don't underline or bold anything in your title. You use the same kind of text that you do in the rest of the text. The only difference is you center your title, and you use the capitalization rules where the primary words in your title are capitalized. That's the only formatting difference, is centering it and capitalizing the important words. Okay, and then finally, the last name and page number are in the upper right header. Okay, remember, your last name goes first, then the page number. There needs to be a space between your last name and the page number. Those also need to be in Times New Roman size 12 font. Your Google Docs will default it back to Arial size 11. You need to change that. Also remember, your heading is different than your header, right? The heading is on the first page, and you write your first name and your last name, your teacher name, that's me, Mr. Rarick, spell my name correctly, please. The class is AP Language, you can write that. And then write the date in ascending order from the smallest unit of measurement to the largest, day, month, year. And all of that is double spaced as well, okay? So quick review, and then I'm done with you for this lesson. Key features: an arguable thesis. Pay careful attention to the language of the text. Assume everything is intentional. Pay careful attention to patterns or themes. Give a clear interpretation. All right, and then write in MLA format. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to figure out if I use this Screencastify thing correctly, and be on the lookout for your next assignment as well. Respond to the questions in this in the text box below. Okay, thank you.